In Houdini, to animate objects along a curve, we need to use a resample node. So let's go to the resample node. And in the resamples node parameters, we have the maximum segments options. So we need to animate the maximum segments. So let's go to the frame number 1, to the first frame, and check the maximum segments and set the maximum segments to 1 and keyframe it. Let's keyframe this parameter. Let's try 0. I mean, it's just well, 0 doesn't work, so let's just leave 1. So let's go to the last frame and set the number of segments to 16, corresponding to the number of points, and set the key and key this parameter. So now we have the animation of our objects along the curve in Houdini. So now we have the same results in Maya and Houdini. So the algorithms are different, so we have some sort of, it looks like a stretching in Maya. And in Houdini, our objects appear one by one because they are assigned to the points on the curve. So in Maya it looks, the animation looks different. So because they appear on the curve regardless of the number of points. So let's hide the attribute editor and the channel box. Let's maximize the pane in Houdini. So we don't have identical animations in Maya and Houdini, because in Houdini it looks like we have the change in the number of points. Like we have the change of the maximum segments parameter. And in Maya, the number of objects doesn't depend on the number of points. So remember, we need to just, we might rebuild the curve. So if we would like to have some sort of a staircase. So let's go to the last frame and select our cube. And then scale our cube. Select the box and change the size of the box. So we might change the size in Y and change in X axis. We will create the similarity of the staircase. So let's go to the last frame. So now we have the animated staircase. So if you'd like to have them looking like stairs, so let's change the tangent type to, so let's change the tangent type to Z axis ignore curve. So we need to change the scale of our box in Z axis. So now we have the animated stairs, the animated staircase. So in Maya, let's go to Maya. Let's select mesh. In the outliner, select our cube, show selection, display, show selection. Let's change the scale of our cube. So now we have the animated staircase in Maya as well. So to make so we need to change and to ignore rotation as well if you would like to. So if you go to the curve node, mesh curve, so it corresponds to calculate rotation. So z-axis ignore curve corresponds to calculate rotation in Maya. So we go to mesh curve and uncheck the calculate rotation option. Or at least they behave similarly. Like in our case, it produces the same results. So if you would like to have animation, so in Maya by default we have animation when we add curve node in the mesh editor. We will set just the animation speed to 0 to eliminate animation. So let's set 0. So let's go to the first frame. So here we have the clip start and the clip end parameters. Let's set the clip end parameter to 0 and set key, and then go to the last frame and set the clip end to 1 and set key. So now we have animation of the objects along the curve. Also in the mesh distribute tab we might change the number of points to see if we will have like similarity in our animations. If we set key and set the number of points to 1 and set key, and then go to the last frame and set the number of points to 16 and set key, or whatever, or we might just leave as it is. So now we have our animations in Houdini and Maya. So we see, like as we said before, in Maya we have the animation looks different because of different algorithms. So if you would like to have the same result, like if you would like to have the same animation, the animation looking exactly the same, we need to use another approach in Maya. Let's stop our animations and go to Maya. So in Maya, if we open our mesh editor and then open the outliner, let's delete the mesh curve node and confirm. So now we have only mesh node, so now we have only the mesh node. And have the linear type of the distribution. So if we change the distance in X, we will see our type of distribution. So we will see our type better. So we will see that this is the linear type. So we need to change the number of points to 1, like we have one object. Then we will add the replicator node, and in the mesh replicator tab we will change the number of replicants. So if we will change the number of replicants, in the perspective view we will see the distribution of our objects. We will see our replicants in the linear manner. So let's go back to the front view. We will change offset position Z to 0. So in the replicator node we have the curve section where we need to assign our curve. So we need to drag and drop our curve from the outliner using the middle mouse button. So let's change the number of replicants to 16, like in Houdini. If you would like to animate them along the curve, we need to change the strength. Let's go to the first frame and set the strength parameter to 0 and set key. And then let's go to the last frame and change the strength parameter to 1 and set key. So, and now we have our animation. So now we have our animation. So now we have similar animations. The only problem is that our objects along the curve are not rotated. They appear one by one in Maya, but the problem is that they are not rotated. So we need to deal with that. We need to change the rotation of our objects proportionally along the curve. Let's stop our animation, go to Maya. Let's open the outliner, select mesh, and here in the attribute editor, let's go to the mesh replicator node. So let's go to the replicator tab and here in the parameters we will change the rotation. We need to change rotate replicants Z. Maybe let's change to 41. So now we have a decent result here. So if you would like to perfect the rotation more, our rotation more, we need to open the replicator rotation ramp, and this rotation ramp allows us to tune the rotations of our objects more. Let's just add points. So let's just change the rotation of our objects one by one by adding points in the rotation ramp. So the more points we have, the more precise control we will have. So let's change the first point and then add next point, add the next point, and add more points. So the last point is like the last object. So obviously at the end of the curve, so obviously if we increase the number of points, we will need to increase the number of, in the distribute tab, we need to increase the number of points in the rotation ramp to have a more precise control over our objects along a curve. If you change it to 15 and set the key, so we have the same, so it doesn't make any difference. So that's the results we have in Maya and Houdini. So like our animations look almost identical, except very, very small, tiny, barely noticeable rotations of our cubes on the curve in Houdini. Just hardly noticeable rotations. Now let's inverse the task. So let's imagine that we have the first approach in Maya, like when our objects are stretching along a curve. Let's do the same in Houdini. So we need to use another approach in Houdini. So let's stop the animation in Maya. So that's the result of another approach in Houdini. So we see that our objects are stretching along the curve. Like, so we might have the same number of objects, so they are stretching and appearing one by one. So let's create a new scene in Houdini. So again, we will create the same curve using the curve tool from the tab. So finish adding points. So now we have the same curve. So let's go to Maya, create new scene. Let's go to the front view. Let's create curve using EP curve tool. Just put in the points. Pressing enter. So in Maya it was just quite simple. Create new cube, scale that cube, create new mesh network, and zero distribution. Let's choose the type zero distribution. Apply and close. Let's go to the mesh editor. Let's add the curve node. Let's open the attribute editor by clicking Ctrl A. Let's select our mesh, the mesh curve tab. In the mesh curve tab, let's just drag and drop our curve and change the animation speed to 0. Let's key the first frame, set the key 0, and let's go to the last frame and let's make step to 1 and set key. So now we have the stretching of objects in the animation. Let's change to the play every frame, the playback speed. So now we have a simple stretch animation of objects along the curve. So let's go to Houdini. So we'll use another approach. So let's create a cube. Let's scale our cube slightly. So let's go to the point mode, to the points mode. Now we need to create chain node. So here we have two inputs. It requires geometry and a curve. Let's connect our geometry and connect our curve. So now we have, so as we see, it doesn't matter what number of points we have. So it doesn't matter if we have a rebuilt curve, and it doesn't matter how many points we have, because we have another algorithm of creating or positioning of objects along a curve. So if you go to the parameters of the chain node, we will see that, so we might change a fraction of curve. So and So our objects appear one by one. So it looks like they appear one by one. We might change the spacing between objects. Let's go to the alignment tab. Here we have piece spacing. So let's change the piece spacing. So the number of objects is changing. So we have the less quantity of our objects. So when we transform our curve, let's go to the curve and select a point on the curve. Change. Let's go to the points. Let's change to the points mode. Change the select tool and select a point and select the move tool. So if you drag the point of the curve, we will change the number of objects, so it doesn't depend on the number of points. So if you change the fraction of curve, so we see that our objects are appearing one by one. So let's try another parameter. So we have map length using fraction of geo length. So now we have the desired stretching, but we see that our objects are deforming and we don't have the spacing deforming like in Maya. So when we go to Maya, we see that the change in spacing. So we need to do the same in Houdini. So in this case, we will change the rigidity parameter. Let's go to the rigidity section and let's enable rigidity. So if you enable rigidity, let's go to map length using fraction of geo length. So we still have the same. In this case, we need to change. We need to uncheck allow rigid geometry to stretch. So when this parameter is checked, we have the same amount of objects distributed along a curve, and they are deformed in the process of animation is changing. And so if we uncheck this box, then our objects along a curve won't be deformed and they will preserve their shape. So now we have our object stretching. So let's go to map length using fraction of geo length. So we need to animate this parameter. We see that it is stretching. Let's go to the first frame set key. So we will set 0 in the first frame. Set keyframe. Let's go to the last frame. And change this parameter to 1 and set key. Commit, change. So now we have the same stretching of our objects in Houdini and Maya. We might change the speed, the playback speed. Let's make step 1 multiplier 3 You might change even to 6 to have faster playback speed. So now we have the same animation. So now we have the same stretch animation in Houdini, like it was in Maya. So let's put our windows side by side, maximize the pane. So now our animations are the same. So we might change control vertex in Maya and just drag them. So that's the results we have in Maya and Houdini. Well, the number of objects, obviously, well, let's see. We go, how many objects we have? So let's go to last frame. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we have 12 objects, and in Maya we have only 10 objects. So we might change we might change either number of copies or so we need to change the number of objects in Houdini. We might change the number of, let's see. So we might change the number of copies. If we go to the chain parameters, so we have here, let's see. So number of pieces we set to explicit number. Let's change explicit number to 10. So we have the same number of objects in Houdini. So if you drag, so we change the position of the point, we will have our spacing changed in Maya. The same is true for Houdini, unless we have the explicit number, because if we have the explicit number set, we won't be able to change the spacing. So we need to uncheck that parameter. So when we'll move our points, we need to uncheck the explicit number. So if we will transform our curve, so let's just change the scale. So we will see that the number of objects is changing because of the length of a curve. So it depends on the length of a curve and not on the number of points. And in Maya, if we select the point, so well, or if we select our curve and we will scale a curve, we see that the spacing is changed. So that's the difference when we are scaling the curves in Houdini and Maya. So that's the difference. So we might preserve the number of of objects, so well, we just go that by setting. So we'll change the number of pieces and set it to explicit number. So in this case, when we will change, let's set like 10. So if we will go and change of our box, we will change the piece spacing changed, obviously because of the scale. If you set, for example, 12, so if you go to the alignment tab and we'll try to change the piece spacing, it doesn't really work. So it will not work because of the explicit number. So the explicit number doesn't affect to change the piece spacing. So for example, if you say like 5, it's not changed. So even if you just type 20, it doesn't work, and 0, it doesn't work. So this parameter doesn't work if we set explicit number. So we won't be able to change the piece spacing. So we need to go back to the previous parameter. And only then we will be able to change the piece spacing. So we see that the spacing is changed and the number of copies is affected as well. And in Maya it is different. So if you change the number of copies, we see that the spacing is changed. So we might select our curve and scale our curve, and the number of objects is not changing. But still we have the same animations in Maya and Houdini, like they work the same. Like our objects, all of them are present and they're stretching along the curve. So the same is in Houdini. So all of the objects are present and they're stretching along the curve in the animation. So if in number of pieces the explicit number is on, so we have the spacing is changed like in Maya, so it works the same. So the spacing is changed between objects.